Welcome back to The Explainer. You know that feeling when you're walking the dog at night and you look up at the dark, perfectly quiet houses on your street? Yeah. Today, we're unlocking the front door, pulling back the pristine curtains and staring directly into the darkness hiding in our own peaceful neighborhoods. We're diving into the psychology of true crime. And I promise you, by the end of this, you are never going to look at the house next door exactly the same way again.
So, it all starts with this really fundamental, honestly kind of unsettling question: why are we so deeply obsessed with the monsters in our own backyards? I mean, think about it. Why do we spend our precious hours of downtime, when we're supposed to be relaxing, binging stories of terror, violence, and just unthinkable betrayals happening right down the street?
Well, the answer actually hides in a concept that has completely infiltrated our culture. It's called the suburban Gothic. Basically, it's a subgenre of fiction and film that dramatizes all those deep, unspoken anxieties of suburban life. But here is the crucial twist. The real threat? It isn't a monster from outer space. It's internal. The danger is lurking right there within the family unit, hiding comfortably behind a white picket fence.
Just think about the pop culture touchstones we literally all grew up with. A Nightmare on Elm Street, Twin Peaks, Poltergeist, The Stepford Wives. I mean, how many of those have you watched? These stories absolutely thrive on neighborhood secrets and the illusion that everything is just fine. They hold up a mirror to our deep, uncomfortable cultural conditioning. That nagging, persistent feeling that suburban perfection, it's a total lie.
And that brings us to the absolute most chilling realization of this whole suburban Gothic aesthetic. The threat is already inside the house. And guys, that spine-tingling realization, it isn't just for horror movies anymore. It maps directly onto our very real, modern, and frankly insatiable obsession with true crime. Because the monsters aren't imaginary, right? They're real people walking the exact same streets we do.
Let's trace how this built up over time, because our morbid curiosity didn't just magically appear the day streaming launched. Nope. Way back in the late 15th century, gruesome crime reports were already being printed for the masses. By the 16th century, these wildly emotion-laden news stories were spreading like wildfire among the upper class. Fast forward to the mid-20th century, and you've got authors like Truman Capote applying super sophisticated literature devices to real-life murders. And that basically paved the way for the landscape we're in right now, which is just absolutely flooded with binge-worthy audio and endless documentaries.
And here's the thing, they knew exactly how to hook us from day one. Early publishers deliberately used these highly sensationalist trigger words in their titles. Words like frightful, dreadful, and grievous. Why? Because they were explicitly preying on our desperate, fundamental human need to feel extreme emotions. They capitalized on that sensationalism to make people connect, feel alive, and, experience a massive thrill, but from a totally safe distance.
But okay, who exactly is consuming all of this darkness today? If you picture the stereotypical consumer of violent media, your brain probably jumps to, guys seeking out action. But the data reveals a totally shocking reality. True crime is not a stereotypically guy thing at all. Women are the primary consumers. But the reasons why they're engaging with these terrifying narratives, it's going to completely change how you view the entire genre.
See, women generally aren't watching for the blood or the gore. They're watching for survival. Studies show that women actually consume true crime to learn self-defense mechanisms. They want to decode the psychology of potential killers and literally figure out how to avoid becoming a victim. They aren't treating this like casual entertainment. They're treating these stories as a literal, high-stakes defense manual.
And look, this fear is definitely not coming out of thin air. We have to look at the data impartially here. Statistically speaking, men are actually more likely to be victims of deadly crimes overall. But the media heavily and disproportionately reinforces stories featuring female victims, and particularly white female victims. This massive overrepresentation completely skews public perception, and it directly drives this intense underlying fear that fuels the true crime obsession among women.
And this brilliantly illustrates just how broad the audience tuning into these defense manuals actually is. When we dive into specific research, like this recent Capstone survey data, we see the vast majority of consumers, over 63%, are young, falling right into that 18 to 24 age bracket. And the gender split? In this specific data set, it's surprisingly close to even. We're talking roughly 52% female and 48% male. So it's this incredibly youthful, widespread fascination that spans right across all demographics.
But get ready for this, because here is a truly staggering reality. A massive 73.5% of people in that same study report actively consuming true crime content. Think about that. Nearly 3/4 of people are willingly subjecting themselves to incredibly dark, terrifying realities on a regular basis. I mean, this is no longer some fringe hobby. It is a full-blown mainstream cultural pillar.
So what does this all mean? Well, it reveals a fascinating and, honestly, somewhat disturbing psychological pivot called the local fear factor. Why are we so magnetically drawn to violence in our own backyards rather than, say, crimes on the other side of the planet? It's because, paradoxically, we actually prefer the danger we know.
Now, what's really interesting here is how it proves this local bias is universally hardwired into us. When survey participants in Armenia were given choices between reading a fictionalized true crime headline from their own area versus an exotic one from abroad, they heavily favored their own backyard. Whether it's choosing a local mystery surrounding Lake Savon over a case in Pittsburgh or Mount Ararat over California, respondents consistently gravitated right back toward the familiar, the very places they inhabit.
To put a number on it, nearly 70% of people explicitly stated they actively want to read local true crime stories. It's a bit of a twisted psychological craving, right? People don't just want to know how some random stranger survived in a distant forest. They want to know how someone survived the exact streets they walk down every single day.
One participant actually summed up this chilling need absolutely perfectly, saying, "There is not enough light spread on local crimes. It needs to be unveiled." You see, audiences view true crime not just as a casual binge watch, they see it as an urgent uncovering of hidden local truths. It's their way of unearthing the dark dynamics of their own hometowns, literally just to stay prepared.
But here is where the story takes a really dark turn for you, the consumer. By constantly searching for these local survival tactics and exposing yourself to these horrors just to feel prepared, you might actually be getting stuck in a psychological loop. This desperate search for safety is, paradoxically, a vicious trap that's closing right in on your own mental health.
Let's map this out. This is the dizzying cycle of fear, and it pulls you in step by step. First, you have a natural, totally normal baseline fear of crime. Second, you start consuming true crime to learn survival skills and, regain a sense of control. But third, because you're now constantly exposing your brain to violent narratives, you develop this heightened awareness and paranoia, which drops you right into step 4, an immensely increased fear of crime. Watching true crime to feel safe actually programs your brain to be far more terrified.
So the crucial point is that media sensationalism is creating a completely false reality. Yes, obviously crimes happen, but overconsumption completely tricks your brain into believing the outside world is infinitely more chaotic, threatening, and violent than objective statistics actually show. Your brain simply loses the ability to differentiate the extreme 1 in a million cases you hear in a story from your totally normal everyday life.
So, if you're going to keep exploring this genre, you absolutely must actively protect your mind. Here is your actual survival strategy. Number 1, take frequent breaks. Seriously, do not binge 10 episodes in a row. Number 2, set strict boundaries. Maybe, don't listen right before you fall asleep alone in the dark. And most importantly, constantly remind yourself that this is highly edited, sensationalized media completely designed to hijack your attention. It is not your reality.
Ultimately, true crime should be an escape, not a prison for your mind. Look, it's entirely natural to seek justice, to try to understand the absolute darkest parts of human psychology, and to just want to feel prepared. But we absolutely cannot let the horrors of the suburban Gothic dictate how we actually live our lives, or let the monsters on our screens become the monsters we're convinced are hiding behind every single corner.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I want you to take a hard, honest look at your own habits. Think about the audio playing in your earbuds when you take your evening walk, or the documentary auto-playing on your TV right now. What are you hiding in your playlist tonight? Are you listening to learn, or are you listening out of fear? Keep learning, stay curious, and as always, thank you so much for joining me on The Explainer.